Ready to kick off? All right, let's do this. Let's call to order, please, Deborah. What?
That's Zoom recording.
Hello, Zoom.
Siri?
Mr. Freeman.
Here.
Mr. Kelly.
Here.
Mr. Campbell.
Here.
All right, if you'd all rise, we'll do the Pledge of Allegiance. And we're going to actually ask Mr. Combs to lead us in the pledge tonight.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
That was inspiring, sir. All right, so. All right, so we're going to, tonight's agenda is a public hearing. We're going to discuss some zone change issues. And I'm supposed to read instructions from my handy dandy agenda. Sometimes I go off script, so I'm going to try to stay on it tonight. Anyone who wishes to speak during this public hearing, applicant, staff, and or the public must be sworn in. We will allow the public to speak at the appropriate time during this hearing, following receipt of the staff report, presentation, and questions from the trustees. So I have a little oath here that I'm supposed to administer to everyone who wants to talk, but why don't we do this? Why don't we do the staff piece first before I swear people in? How about that? Well, I haven't heard the. Okay, but what? All right. Can anyone stand up? Anyone who wishes to speak tonight, please stand up and raise your right hand and do the following oath. Okay, am I running the meeting or you? All right. Do you solemnly swear or affirm under penalty of perjury that you will tell the truth in these proceedings?
Yes.
All right. No one else wants to speak? I'll swear you in if you want. If you change your mind, I'll swear you in later. All right. So Eddie, why don't you take it away and start discussing zoning case ZC 2021-002, please.
Thank you. So the application that you have before you right now was initiated June 1st, 2021, and it covers a number of different topics, some related, some not so related, but all in your staff report. These topics range from conditional use permits, institutional housing, automotive uses, which was a big theme, development review procedures, the downtown overlay, signage, as well as brew pubs, and then a small rezoning, all of which we'll dive into more of the details and nitty gritty with it and can get as deep as you want on it. The Planning Commission, Claremont County Planning Commission, made their approval recommendation June 22nd, 2021. And the Pierce Township Zoning Commission made their approval recommendation on the foregoing materials July 6th, 2021. In your package, you'll have the Claremont County Planning Commission approval report. And that's just these next couple pages here, just reiterates. And getting into these topics here, the conditional use permit modifications include adding Pierce Township District references. So just a little bit of background on that. A conditional use permit is a review of a use where we basically say, you know, this use is probably going to be okay, but it might need a little bit of extra review. There might be some additional conditions, that sort of thing, just because of the context. In the event that review is required, they go to the Board of Zoning Appeals. The Board of Zoning Appeals makes that determination as to whether or not that use is too intense or not. Now, there are a few uses that we're adding into our regulation that would require that type of review. The former Amelia Village, for instance, did have some conditional uses, but our Pierce Township zoning regulations did not. But we'll get into that too a little bit later. Institutional uses, retirement homes, hospices, those sorts of things. Recommending to move those to a conditional use permit review from permitted just outright, and that's in the Amelia Suburban Business District. That's very similar to our general business district. We'd also remove that from the downtown overlay. Automotive uses generally. Now, the theme with a lot of these items is it's kind of a work in progress. We're making sure that our regulations and the Amelia neighborhood regulations continue to blend and mesh together coherently, make a lot of sense. One of the general themes that we see in a lot of our plan documents are just automotive uses and the proliferation of automotive uses. So the recommendation here is that auto body repair, fuel services, auto washing, those types of uses would be moved to a slightly more stringent conditional use permit review, as opposed to just being permitted outright, essentially in most commercial business districts. Automotive uses would also, or automotive fuel sales would also have an additional condition on them, which states businesses employed in the sale of gasoline shall maintain a minimum setback of 550 feet from all residentially zoned property and or residential uses, schools, and daycares. This came up as part of the research where we were reading into it a little bit deeper just to make sure that, because ultimately what we're trying to do is minimize impacts to the community, allow business to flourish, but also ensure that people aren't going to be adversely impacted. And one of the things we found was the study that pops up that's been corroborated, indicating that an additional setback of fuel stations from residential areas is generally advantageous. There's gases and things like that necessarily leak out. So that was an interesting finding that we came up with. Now the downtown overlay, which again, it exists, and I'll show you the map of that in just a moment here. The text of the downtown overlay is proposed to be modified a little bit. Basically, we would give the zoning commission a little bit more flexibility in their reviews. So basically, new construction in the downtown overlay would go through the zoning commission. So there would actually be a meeting similar to what we have here, where the applicant would come before the board. This is contrary to how things generally tend to go right now, where if you're building a new commercial building in the overlay, building a new building, it just goes through our office. It's just an administrative review. With the overlay, though, the zoning commission would be doing that review in conjunction with staff. There's a little bit of flexibility built in there. Minor additions, accessory structures, those sorts of things, very minor additions would just still be kind of business as usual, would just go through the office. So we wouldn't want to hold someone up if they're just adding like a storage closet on a building or something. The map reference would be updated just to include a map, which is a little bit more legible, a little easier to understand. Residential uses would be capped at 4.5 units per acre, and that's in line with our PUD mixed use standards. That's a similar number, or it's the same number rather, similar. One of the main components of the downtown overlay is it permits mixed use. So that's like commercial on the first floor and another use residential or something on the second floor. Pole signage and billboards would not be permitted in the overlay. So it would be limited more to monument signs. You wouldn't have, 20-foot tall pole signs and that sort of thing in the overlay. The amendments also address brew pubs, which is it's a use that's becoming more and more prominent and popular. We see them kind of cropping up throughout the southwestern Ohio and just the U.S. generally. We do not have a regulatory framework in place to really address them. So these amendments define brew pubs, breweries, distilleries, that sort of thing, set up the review process, which essentially brew pubs would be permitted in the Amelia Neighborhood Business District under a conditional use permit approval. So they would go to the BZA for their review. They'd be permitted with conditions in the general business and the Amelia Suburban Business District. And the conditions can be seen here as well, which establishments producing greater than 5,000 barrels up to 10,000 annually must obtain a conditional use permit. Uses exceeding the 10,000 wouldn't be permitted. If you go over that 10,000, we basically look at you as this is an industrial use. I mean, it's like you're a Miller distillery, essentially, Miller brewery. But there will also be cross references to 5.04F. Bars and taverns shall be set back a minimum of 300 feet from parks, religious places of worship, residential zoning, district properties, as well as educational facilities. And just to reiterate, the very large uses like breweries and distilleries, which are 10,000 barrels or more, those are conditional use permits only in the industrial district, wouldn't be permitted elsewhere. So this is the downtown overlay that we've been referencing here. As you can see, there's essentially two shades of blue. One's a little more green, and that's further east along 125. And then there's a lighter blue that extends west. The lighter blue portion is the expansion portion. That's about 33 properties. So as you know, the downtown overlay already exists, and it's primarily situated between Floral and Oak. But this expansion kind of runs from Oak Street west up to about Hicks Lane. It's, for reference, it's about the Wendy's property, just about up there. And it's 33 properties altogether. The rezoning that's proposed here, you can see in red. Now those properties are currently zoned Amelia Suburban, and they would be rezoned to Amelia Neighborhood Business. Amelia Neighborhood Business is a little bit less audit, like it's more of it's similar to our neighborhood business district, where it's more of a walkable sort of business district. It doesn't allow as much, it isn't as permissive for automotive uses and things like that, like car sales. And you can see the adjoining lots near it. Now, one of the items that we've gone back and forth with, and the zoning commission obviously made their recommendation, but I just wanted to bring it to your attention as well. This property is presently split zoned. So as you can see, it's probably easier to see on your packets, but the red property there is also conjoined with the R1. So R1 is a residential zoning. As it stands now, it's basically, it's commercial and residential, just as it stands now. The proposal here is it would still stay commercial and residential split zoned, just along those lines of what you see there. And it just out of an abundance of caution, I mean, the staff and the zoning commission went back and forth and discussed this pretty significantly. In an ideal circumstance, you don't have split zoning just because it can create confusion. But the zoning commission determined that they were most comfortable with the property owners making a decision regarding those residential components of their property. They weren't as comfortable with, commercial to commercial is one thing, but changing their residential component to commercial is something else. And so that was where their comfort level was with it. So as such, staff recommends the Board of Trustees consider approving the foregoing materials and make a motion to recommend approval, denial, or approval with modifications, the text and map amendments therein. So specifically what staff would do is staff would come back to your next meeting with a resolution to either approve, deny, or approve with modifications, whatever it is, whatever proposal you find to be necessary.
So you're concluding?
Yep. So staff's available if you have any questions.
All right. Nick, Pete, any questions, comments?
Can we back up real quick? Yeah. So where is that at exactly? I mean, I can see that, but.
So the old Amelia, you know where the old train depot is on Mr. Palmer's property?
Yeah.
So those red structures are the train depot area. So Glen Mary subdivision is kind of directly west of this location here.
Okay.
Does that make sense? So it's right
Yeah.
there.
So the residential lots behind it are the ones that you thought it best for the property owners to decide how they wanted that. Is that what you're saying?
Well, yeah, that was what the zoning commission was most comfortable with, yes.
But it looks like they're already moving dirt back there.
Well, the residential that you see there between the premier property and the proposed rezoning property, that's not slated for any sort of development. That might be an agricultural clearing or something to that effect.
So it's just the orange or red square that we're talking about,
Yes.
letting the property owner decide how they'd like that to be zoned.
Well, the red part is the part that we're saying goes from Amelia Suburban Business to Amelia Neighborhood Business. But that property is also attached to the R1. That kind of looks like the dirt.
Yeah,
clear.
okay.
And that's so it's all.
So
part
that's
of the
all
same
one parcel?
Yes, exactly.
I see. So you're going to bring the parcels in alignment and have it all zoned as the same thing?
Well, that's where we were going back and forth on the discussion, but the zoning commission determined that they'd rather leave the R1 portion just as it is and just rezone the portion that's along 125 there.
Okay.
And if the property owner was so inclined to rezone the remainder of the parcel, then they would just go ahead and do that at their behest.
Okay. What's the dirt being moved around for?
I'm not sure. I think it's just an agricultural operation.
This is an older picture because when you look at the parcel immediately to the west of that one, you actually see that Premier isn't even up. They're just clearing the Premier site. So the Stonehenge is not there, just the main stack of Stonehenge.
Stonehenge. Gotcha.
So that's probably, Palmer's probably using that for soybeans or something. At the time that this satellite photo was taken.
That sounds reasonable. I would think in that location, it would be advantageous for a property owner to be zoned commercial, wouldn't you?
Well, I missed the last part of that.
I would think it would be advantageous if I own property there. I would like it to be zoned commercial for resale value, don't you think?
Possibly, yeah. It's hard to say. You never quite know exactly what's on everyone's mind. But we did reach out to Mr. Palmer. I believe the Grimes family's here as well. We have spoken to them. So we've made an effort to reach out to everyone, and also the Emvasom property as well. But the recommendation just came out to kind of just leave it to the 125 portion. I think that part of the reasoning was there's a perception that the interior of the property is a little bit too far off the beaten path to be commercial. I think that was part of the reasoning, which again, it's subjective, but I think that was more or less the kind of the reasoning was. It's not.
Do you have a map of our overall commercial and how that, that blue zone was kind of,
Yeah.
so that pretty much hugs 125 fairly tight, right?
Mhm.
Yeah.
We don't want to get too far and, you're kind of blazing into uncommercial territory. Okay. I was just trying to understand. Thank you.
Sure.
So you have the Palmer or the Premier property, and then immediately next to it, you have an R1. So that's presumably residential at that point. You can have some interesting mixes of those uses through there. And I'm just kind of wondering about the logic of having residential tucked inside there where you've got, Amelia neighborhood, Amelia suburban, and then an R1. What was the logic on leaving it as R1?
I think so staff's initial recommendation was to rezone that to a business district classification. But I think that the zoning commission, they more or less felt a little more uncomfortable going from, I think maybe they felt it was a little presumptuous to go from commercial or from residential and just take it all the way commercial. They felt that it was incumbent upon the property owner to make that level of determination. In particular, just because it's not directly on 125. I think the association is, well, if it's 125, commercial makes more sense, but if it's back off of 125, it's maybe a little bit harder pill to swallow. Now, the market might feel entirely different than that. And part of the reason might be, well, if someone decides they really want the property, they really want to rezone the property, they have the option is not taken from them. But I don't know. I just don't know that the zoning commission was comfortable making that determination or the decision for the owner.
To be sure, it's all one parcel right now.
It is, yeah.
There could be a need for a deeper commercial lot from someone.
Right.
I guess anytime we do zoning changes, overlays, anything like that, aren't we, by the nature of what we're doing, making a decision for a landowner?
Generally speaking, yes.
That's what I thought.
Yep.
Okay, Pete, do you have anything?
No.
So 10,000 barrels is too much, huh? I
Well,
thought that was just a good start. right, if the two of you have no further questions, I have no further questions. Do we want to open it up to the floor for comments? Okay, we're going to open it up to the floor for comments. Speakers in favor of the zone change, please come on down and state your name. Don't rush.
Not all at once.
Speakers opposed, come on down, state your name. Okie dokie.
Anybody riding the fence? Do we have a category for that?
Yeah.
I'm not sure, but I want to talk.
Anybody? Anybody? I mean, we can't have a 30-minute meeting. We wouldn't know what to do with that. Well, let's argue about something. Nick, come on, you and I could fight about something.
That's true. We can figure it out. We can figure something out.
How about that trade with the Yankees? I mean, that was just crazy with the Reds. I mean, yes, Loretta, come on down, Loretta. Loretta's just like, if I,
That's right.
she's like, if I testify, he'll shut up. She's like, if I testify, he'll shut up and we can get out of here early.
No, only thing I do want to also speak to is split zoning, which is just not best practices. I understand the rationale behind it in this circumstance. I don't know that the property owner would have objected to it all being consistently zoned. The only other question I have for Eddie, and we did not talk about this beforehand, is could the overlay zone still go over both, or the overlay zone could only go over a commercially zoned property? So we couldn't correct at least part of that boundary by putting the overlay over all of it if half of it is zoned residential. The difficulty I see with split zoning is then when you pull your regs out and it says you have to measure distances from lot lines, you're talking about two different sets of regulations on one parcel. So it's just not the best way to have to manage the code. But if you could answer that overlay question, that's all I have.
So the one hardship there would be a hardship created if we were to expand the downtown overlay onto a residential parcel. And what would happen is that the downtown overlay precludes certain uses, one of which is residential on the first floor. So you would essentially have an R1 parcel with a downtown overlay on it, where your R1 says you can only build single family houses, but your overlay says you can't have residential on the first floor. So you're kind of stuck in a, old fashioned conundrum there.
So there's nothing there now, though. I mean, so unless the owner wanted to build a residential house or something in the back, if they wanted to do that, I guess they wouldn't be happy with the overlay. Otherwise, it sounds like I couldn't foresee any issue with that if I own that property.
Right. Yeah. If they wanted to build a house on that R1 right now, they wouldn't have a problem. They'd be able to do that.
What about in the red box? If they wanted to build a house inside the red box?
So yeah, right now they wouldn't be able to, and in the future they're proposed to not be able to because it's just commercial. The
But
only
with
thing
the- With the overlay, they could, as long as the bottom floor of it was.
that's exactly right. That's
So
exactly
then
right.
it could stay mixed use.
Yeah.
Now, when you've got the R1 here, I'm still fixated on the R1. What's the use immediately behind it?
What kind of uses are permitted in there?
Yeah. Is the adjacent property below it in R1, or have we do we have an island of R1?
So if scanning out here, there are a couple properties here. So if you can kind of pinpoint where the tower site is, that property is zoned residential. And what you see is basically the red lot, for lack of a better term for it, is commercial on the 125 portion and then residential behind it. Directly southeast of that lot, you see a bigger undeveloped lot, kind of right at the corner, right at Maple and Oak, right kind of where if Maple were to be extended, it would just run right through the middle of that lot, if that makes sense. That lot is zoned commercial or residential rather as well. So it's commercial really on the west side of Oak there. Once you go south of that overlay, the way that the overlay was drawn, this probably would have been the easiest thing to say from the beginning. The way that the overlay is drawn right now, it's only on commercial property. Anything that's essentially just south of it there is residential primarily.
So the premier site
The Premier site is the exception. That is zoned business.
Right.
Yep.
But then we've got the parcels that are adjacent to the retention pond that are also zoned commercial/business, correct?
Yes, the non-Glen Mary parcels there. Yep. Mhm.
And then as you're looking at the red box as I'm looking at it to my right, that's also commercial along 125.
That
So,
is correct.
so now let's move kind of south, what is that, southwest? There's an R1 right there. And is there an R1 behind it? Or is this an island of R1?
No, it does have adjacent residential zoning just to the south of it.
Okay.
It's all the way down to it.
It does.
So the split zone parcel is here?
This is it? Yep.
Here. Right, so this is a vacant parcel that's zoned R1, this is vacant parcel zoned R1. This is the premier site, has the overlay. This one now is split zone R1 and with the overlay and commercial. correct?
Oh,
That's right.
there's nothing to substitute for good old fashioned pointing at something, you know? It's like all this electronic stuff. It's like, let me just get up there and point at it.
For as great as these screens are, the light doesn't show up.
Because yeah, what's east of it juts out further south,
Yes.
right? As far as the overlay, what
Yeah.
we're considering to be.
But looking at what we have here, I couldn't tell what was further behind that R1. And I would not want to have an island of R1 in the middle of commercial. Just doesn't make sense.
Come on up.
The rationale was that if Dave wanted to utilize that large R1 property in front of Premier, he would come to us with a request to rezone it because I was going to sell it. It was not appropriate for us as a zoning commission to rezone it without his approval. So our rationale was, we would leave it at R1. If somebody bought it and wanted to change it, they would come in and ask us and tell us what they're going to do with it. We'd look at it and go, yeah, good idea, bad idea, right? And that's what happened to the split property. With down there where that's triangle under before the blue bit spreads out coming down to Oak, that triangle that Loretta pointed to, that's the split section that's still residential. Again, if you wanted to build a giant bloody mall there and you wanted to do that starting with the property, you would come in and go, I want to use this triangle at the back here and it needs to be rezoned into commercial. And we'd go, yeah, fine. But it didn't behoove us to do it ourselves. That's why we left it as it was, okay?
You may or may not say, okay, fine.
Well,
Otherwise, it would need to be brought to you.
We may or may not, but it wasn't appropriate. We didn't think it was appropriate for us to change it without anybody requesting it or doing anything else, okay?
So the TR zoning, for instance, that we've changed recently. I mean, and I know we all have an opinion, but other people may have different opinions, but nonetheless, we made a call, right? I mean, I kind of understand the idea of kind of limiting the split zoning. Can we reach out to Palmer to see how he
You tried
feels
that,
about
didn't
this?
you?
I have spoken to Mr. Palmer, and we shared the information with him.
Dave didn't want to change it.
Yeah, I met him on site and everything
Okay,
too.
well, that's kind of what I'm trying to get to here.
Right.
Just break it out, throw it on the table. You don't want to change it?
Yeah.
Okay.
So we didn't.
I don't,
It was very new. I mean, it was just very neutral. There was no commitment to anything. There was no hard feeling about being opposed to this or anything to that effect based on our conversations. We had multiple conversations too. So I think he's maybe just looking at it like if something comes up, then he'll act at that point in time.
Yeah, because I almost feel like in certain regards, it boxes you in one regard if you want to build a house back there. Otherwise, it's all advantageous. It seems
you can build a house back in the R1 section. The part up front is a little bit different.
not if we overlay the R1 section. That was what I was, but I would think from a commercial perspective, if you have all that lot zoned commercial, somebody could come in and buy that for a commercial use and have it all. I would just think as a landowner, that would be more advantageous.
But I guess since it doesn't matter to him, I mean, the next landowner could come back and request a zone change based on their proposed use. right?
They could, yes.
This
It
one
could, but it's not a
nothing?
bird in hand, and when you're going to sell it, you don't have that ready to go for a potential buyer. So now it's an extra hoop I gotta jump through if I'm looking to buy that
Yeah.
property.
Yeah, I've got to do the designs, I got to go through the zone change process, hearings and red tape. I'm just still kind of iffy on the idea of a split zone. I have a feeling that's going to come back to bite us in the butt. But it does allow for review by the zoning commission, so, correct?
Well, so the portion that's R1, it would not, it wouldn't, it would just be by right R1 development.
Right, but if somebody came back and said, I want to put something there,
Right.
it's a commercial use,
Yep, they would be
a
required.
20,000 barrel distillery there.
Gotta be 999,000.
Take one down. Then they could come in and they could apply for a zone change.
Yep.
Now, that one seems clean to me because I get that. The only thing I was worried about is that if something behind it is commercial and we've got an R1 landlock, then it seemed kind of weird to me, but even that can be changed. But the split zoning, I just don't feel comfortable with the split zone, but I get it. It's kind of mixed use kind of approach where they have to come in and show us the use and the mixed use. So I can get comfortable with it, I suppose.
Well, what's wrong with considering the overlay and letting Mr. Palmer come in and voice his concerns if he doesn't like it?
Where is Dave tonight? What part of the world is he in hiking or adventuring in? I presume you've talked to him and he's comfortable with what we've proposed. Otherwise he'd be here or someone representing him would be here. The Grimes family, they're here. So,
Yeah, I sent him the packet information, the meeting information,
so,
and
I
I
don't-
met with him on site.
I mean, I don't want to make this harder. I mean, we've had people look at this, kick the tires. The county has kicked the tires. So, I don't want to make this more difficult than it has to be, but it just, like I said, split zoning is something I've never really seen before. So it just kind of freaks me out a little bit, but I get it. It's kind of just a different term for mixed use, right?
In a sense, yeah. And one piece of consolation that doesn't really solve any of these problems, but it's just a piece of reality that might help is that this was the way that we found it, so to speak. I mean, we're not creating a circumstance where we're taking a pristine parcel here and we're making 3/4 of it one thing and then leave. It already is commercial and residential. It's just a matter of whether or not we want to just go ahead and fix the entire thing. So this isn't like a problem being created. It already is what it is.
That strip along 125 is probably going to want to develop into being commercial. It's going to be more retail commercial. And you're right. When you move back behind there, I don't know what's going to happen with Stonehenge over time, but you do have the residential use further to the west. It could be that this whole section turns residential, but you're not going to get a lot of commercial retail that far off 125. You might, but you're not probably likely. So I'm comfortable with the way it's kind of laid out at this point, and the overlay is fine with me as well. And I think it does start to bring everything into concurrence from being a village to being a township. So I guess I'm okay with it. And if no one else wants to talk about it, do you? All right. I'll take it.
Stan, what do you think? Are you done?
Yeah, we went through it ad nauseum before we made the recommendation to the trustees.
Okay.
All right, so we have three choices to make, gentlemen. We can either recommend approval, recommend denial, recommend approval with modifications. What is your, uh-oh.
I don't know if we got it. I don't recall a motion to close the public hearing. Okay.
Okay, well, do we have a motion to close the public hearing?
Motion.
We have a motion. Do we have a second to close the public hearing?
Second.
All right, we have a motion and a second. Roll call, Debbie.
Mr. Campbell.
Yes.
Mr. Kelly.
Yes.
And Mr. Freeman.
Yes. Deliberation by the trustees. I think we did that. I think we've achieved that. So then now we're up to the motion for consideration to draft resolution for the August 11th Board of Trustees meeting. Again, I'll repeat our three options: recommend approval, recommend denial, or recommend approval with modifications.
I'll make a motion to approve it as presented. I think there's enough flexibility here going forward for any future property owner to where it can be modified. So I'll make that motion accept with that modification.
We have a motion. Do we have a second?
Eddie, what do you think about the split zoning?
In an ideal circumstance, it would all be one thing. It makes administration of it easier and everything. I don't think it's a death shot necessarily to anything in particular. Where I would have been significantly concerned was if there seemed to be a feeling that it was commercial, but we were contemplating making it less intense. Since the discussion's kind of aiming more toward, well, should we make it so that you can put more intense uses out there? It seems like the impact concern is mitigated, if that makes sense. We're not worried about people getting hurt, is more or less what I'm trying to say. Mm-hmm. So in the event that someone has some really great commercial use that's super viable in that area and the market's really calling for it, as Dr. Campbellis was saying, I mean, there's an option available. I would, of course, my initial recommendation was make it Amelia neighborhood business, but zoning commission was very thorough with it and their reasoning was consistent. They were pretty unanimous in it. So I think we can fix it if we need to in the future.
But even under Amelia business or neighborhood business, they would, any prospective buyer would have to come back to the zoning commission to approve a use.
So that would be if we put the overlay on it. So in the event that you determine that you wanted to change it from R1 to a business, I would also recommend in that event to go ahead and put the overlay on it.
So we have a second?
Yeah, I don't know. I think I think the overlay thing to me seems to make a little more sense, particularly if Palmer's not opposed to it. I don't know if I'm just not understanding, so I'm taking a crash course on this here. And I've reviewed the material before the meeting, but I'm still a little, personally on the differing opinions, right?
That would be more.
I think I might have to.
Oh, sorry.
Huh? Alan's clicking.
I was
What's it doing?
clicking. That was actually my knee.
It's his knee.
It's my chair. It's my chair.
So yeah, I'm leaning a little toward, particularly if Palmer's not opposed to it, a little toward approval with the modification for that potentially, with just pushing the overlay back. I think that might make more sense, particularly if the homeowner isn't, the property owner isn't opposed to it.
In fairness to Mr. Palmer, he didn't explicitly say he doesn't have a problem with it, but I'm assuming based off of the discussions that we had, there was no issue.
Yeah.
But he didn't explicitly say, yes, please make that X. You know what I mean? Right. I don't want him to bust through the door.
Well, perhaps
and say,
he was
"Oh,
apprehensive. He didn't
more-
understand, or you're trying to tell him what's going on. And anybody would be if you're trying to change some kind of zoning on their property. I might be apprehensive too.
Yeah.
I'm leaning toward the approval with modification for that.
Okay.
I'm not opposed to that.
So in that case, then you would make a motion, recommend approval with modification. Is that correct?
Right.
What's
You
the-
guys are welcome to tell me you don't agree with me.
No.
I mean, that's just kind of where I'm leaning.
Regardless, so the way I see it, I think there's, either way, there's flexibility for whomever develops that property, whether it be Mr. Palmer or the subsequent buyer. I think either way, it's okay.
It seems like to me a little less red tape for somebody and a little more viability for a sale of that property, I would think. If I owned that property, it'd be a no-brainer for me, unless I wanted to build a house back there, unless I had intentions to build a residential home on the back edge of that property. Otherwise, it seems to just not make a whole lot of sense to me.
So you
Unless I'm
also,
missing
so
something.
rezone it to Amelia neighborhood business and also expand the overlay on top of it as well. Is that my understanding correct?
Yeah, because we have to, when we do this, when we recommend a modification, we have to recommend a modification. So whatever that modification is, we need to direct them.
Can you
to do it.
expand the overlay over the residential?
It's not recommended just because you can't build residential on the first floor in the overlay. So that's kind of, that would be an issue it would cause, but
That makes sense.
yeah.
So that little wedge basically would not be included in the overlay district, right? I'm looking at the map, the parcel map, if you will. In that back part between the healthcare facility, so-called, and those two parcels would be exempt from the overlay. Is that, am I understanding that correctly?
As proposed right now, they would be.
And then what they did is they put that red box on the parcel that's by the road.
125.
So it kind of makes that link.
And we're making a motion to draft, right? I mean, we get another crack at this for public comment.
Well,
And when
this-
we actually
this will come-
vote on it?
Yeah, this will come back as a resolution at next board meeting.
Right.
So there will be debate or discussion at that point too. And the sidebar decided what?
Well, it might be, yeah, procedurally, it might be advantageous for you to, just so that we don't run into any kind of advertising or any other hiccups, if you reopen the public hearing and continue it to the next meeting, then we don't have to reinvent the wheel. We can kind of have the leeway to, basically what I'm concerned about is if you make the modification and for whatever reason, Mr. Palmer comes back and says, whoa, wait a second, like the last packet I had didn't have that in there. Who knows what, you know?
I mean, that probably makes some sense. So in other words, the motion would be the fourth track, which would be to table the discussion for tonight and then reopen it prior to our August the 11th.
Continue this public hearing.
Right.
But we are looking to get some of this done so that we can kind of shore this up in regards to making it more clear on what's acceptable and what's not, right?
Yeah, and that could be part of your motion too, where this is the only thing that maybe is held back. We could have a resolution where we just take care of everything else. There's nothing saying that it all has to go together.
Modify it that way. That's your
Yeah,
modification.
I'm fine with that. I don't want to hold anything up with this little, it's not a huge, to me, it's not a huge deal breaker. I just, I'm going to make sure it's done right.
Okay.
But yeah, I certainly don't want to hold up a bunch of other stuff that's going to be less advantageous because I have some concern about one little piece. So can we approve the rest of it? And
You could prepare two resolutions.
Yep. Yeah, so right. Yeah, we could have, first resolution would be essentially the entire application with the exception of the rezoning and the overlay expansion. And then the second resolution would be what this one modification that would include, I'm assuming the rezone to commercial and then the expansion of the overlay.
Or thought you just do one as is and one modify. And they take either as it was recommended.
I think that's the cleanest way to do it.
As modified.
I think that's the cleanest way to do it. Then we pick the one we vote on.
well, so we need two motions, right? One to draft a resolution, modified
I
resolution
think there's just one
to disclude,
motion, but it's a motion directing staff to,
draft two resolutions.
correct.
Are you still continuing the public hearing?
Because then that would give us an opportunity to get a couple, could you, after you hear from Mr. Palmer or you have a further discussion with Mr. Palmer, he may come back and say, hey, it's the greatest thing I've ever, it's cool. I'm good with it. Would you be comfortable with that?
Yeah, or he might come back and say, I don't want anything to do with it.
Right. It's the dumbest thing I ever heard.
Right.
So, yeah, I mean, I think that's fair. I mean, allow Palmer Mr. Palmer to have some say in, or further clarification on his property.
So procedurally, since I made a motion, I would modify my motion consistent with what we just discussed, right?
Yep.
Just so that we can,
Yeah.
beg your pardon?
Close the public hearing.
Say again, I'm sorry.
You need to withdraw the motion to close the public hearing from earlier as well.
Okay, okay.
And close the public hearing is closed.
But we have to,
Right,
in
so-
order to continue it, in order to continue it in progress, we have to withdraw. So do I have a motion to withdraw the motion to, okay. So he motioned.
Second.
Second,
And what?
that we're going back into the public session.
So you motion to go back into.
Mhm.
The public hearing.
Right. We're gonna get this straight. We'll be good. We'll get there. So it was made by Pete, seconded by Nick.
To reopen the public hearing and
Around that.
Okay.
prepare for the next.
Now we're back in the public meeting. Now we need a motion to continue. Roll call.
Mr. Campbell.
Yes.
Mr. Kelly.
Here.
And Mr.
Yes. Now we need a motion to continue in progress.
On that motion.
I will second.
We have a motion and a second to continue in progress to August the 11th. And we need a roll call. Roll call.
Mr. Campbell.
Yes.
Mr. Kelly.
Yes.
Mr. Green.
Yes. Okay, so now we've got the motion to continue in progress. Do we need now a motion directing staff to prepare? What would you like it to say, Eddie, or Debbie, or?
I would think one resolution as presented and then one motion with modification.
Yeah, so I'll make the motion to draft one resolution as presented and one resolution with modifications to include the residential back portion of that parcel in the overlay and change to commercial, right?
So we are including that wedge that's currently zoned residential in the overlay as well. Is that,
If we choose to go down that
if we
path.
chose to go down this road? Is that,
Mhm.
am I understanding that correctly?
Yes.
Correct.
Okay, 1 second.
So we got a motion and a second.
Mr. Kelly.
Yes.
Mr. Campbell.
Yes.
And Ms.
Yes, and I think that somewhat wraps it up, except we've got one more piece of business. Eddie, you need to get a hold of David Palmer.
Yep.
And go over this in detail with him so that you can report it back to us or bring him to the meeting on the 11th.
Got it.
Unless he's in New Zealand or wherever else he is hiking or biking or trekking.
You want me to go to New Zealand?
If you
necessary?
could, yeah, go ahead and drag him back. That would be wonderful.
We're not covering your plane ticket then.
All right, so we've accomplished those three things. Do we have any other business? We have public comment, open floor discussion, so anybody, anything, any subject, step on up. Okay, now we're up to adjournment. Do we have a motion to adjourn?
I'll make the motion.
I'll second.
We have a motion and a second. Roll call, Debbie.
Mr. Kelly.
Yes.
Mr. Campbell.
Yes.
And Mr.
Yes. Thank you all.
Well, that was pretty short, relatively speaking.
A little under an hour. That's good.